I think that degrowth will require some big things. I mean, I do really believe that America, in order to really combat climate change, needs to invest in a federal high-speed rail system that would replace a lot of what is done by cars and trucks. I think if America moved more of its shipping back to trains, and those trains were publicly run and publicly owned, I think we would be able to hit some of our climate targets while being able to meet people's needs. I think the other thing, too, is talking about what Saito calls the imperial mode of consumption, where he talks about how, we've talked about this in other episodes, but you have the imperial core and then you have the periphery, right? The periphery is what we would traditionally call the third world. The periphery subsidizes the core, and the core is like, the OECD countries, the United States, Canada, Western Europe, anybody that belongs to NATO, that's the imperial core, right? Yeah. And so, for us living in the core, we do have a higher standard of living, often as the result of the exploitation of people in the periphery. For people who are in countries that are essentially neo-colonies of the United States or France or whoever.
This is a sticking point between me and my partner, Pam, is that every time I talk about the rich, she's like, motherfucker, you're the rich. When you take the whole world into account, you, the middle-class earner in Canada, is the 1%.
Yes. And Saito makes that argument too, is that, the richest 10% of the world are subsidized by the rest of the 90%.
Yeah. And
so we do have a very high standard of living relative to a very large chunk of the world. That I do think is a huge problem.
For sure.
And the main critique I've heard of this is basically that it's a messaging problem. Like it's Americans. And this is how Huber and Phillips start their argument, where they talk about what are you talking about, imperial mode of living? Like Americans, like their wages haven't kept up with productivity, despite the fact that Americans are more productive than ever, that we keep living with austerity, where public goods keep getting slashed and privatized and destroyed, and things keep costing more and more. We get less and less for it. Like Americans do live fairly precarious lives in ways that they didn't, say, a generation or two ago. Yeah. So it is important to say, like, oh, you're part of the imperial mode of living. Yeah, that's technically true, but all of us live poorly compared to what we could.